Have you ever found yourself bored to death on a Saturday night? Don't want to sit around on your phone anymore? Well, I have the perfect activity for you: knitting. The New York Times claims that knitting is great for stress relief and creates a sense of creative fulfillment. By the end of this video, you will be able to make things like scarves, pot holders, and headbands, just as I have before. I will be teaching you all of the steps involved in the most basic knit stitch: casting on, the actual knitting, and casting off. But first, what you'll need: a pair of knitting needles, a ball of yarn in any color or texture that you like, and a pair of scissors. Step 1. Casting on. You need to establish your first row of stitches that will be the basis of the rest of your project, what MarthaStewart.com calls the foundation of any knit work. First, you need to tie a slip knot. Put the end of your ball of yarn in your left hand, curling your fingers around it. Next, hold your pointer and middle fingers in the shape of a peace sign, letting the yarn that's attached to the ball of yarn, also called the working end, fall behind those two fingers. Then, wrap the working end of the yarn around your peace sign once, with the working end behind your fingers once again. Pull the working end through the loop you just made around your fingers, and slide all of the yarn off your left hand, tightening the string as you do so. Congratulations! You have just learned how to tie a slip knot. Now, we're going to introduce just one of the knitting needles. Slide your slip knot onto the needle and tighten your yarn so it's taut around it. There should be no room between the needle and the slip knot. Holding the needle in your right hand, and hold the working end of the yarn with your middle, ring, and pinky fingers. Wrap the yarn between your fingers and the needle around your thumb, and back around your pointer finger. Here's the maneuver I did to accomplish that again in real time. Then, take your knitting needle under the yarn against your thumb, through the yarn behind your pointer, creating a new loop on your knitting needle. Here, I perform that process slowly, and then at a pace I normally would. Congratulations, you now know how to cast on. Repeat this process as many times as you would like. I did 7 for this example. Step 2. The actual knitting. Hold the needle with your first row of stitches in your left hand. Put the second needle in your right. Slip the tip of the empty needle underneath and behind the first stitch on your left needle. Wrap the working end of your yarn behind and around the empty needle, bringing it to the right. Slip the empty needle onto the yarn you just wrapped, pulling it through the stitch you entered previously. Let the new stitch you just created slide onto the needle in your right hand, dropping it off the left. Here is that process in real time. You'll repeat these same steps with every stitch on your left needle, transferring them all over to the right. Your empty needle will now become full of 2 rows of stitches. You can tug on your stitches, especially at the beginning of your project, in order to see the progress that you've made. Once all of your stitches are transferred, put the full needle in your left hand and the now empty one in your right. Do the exact same process to create your 3rd row of stitches. Congratulations! You now know how to perform a basic knit stitch. But what happens if you drop a stitch between both needles? Do not pull, or you'll run the risk of undoing the loop, a point from which there is no return. However, do not panic. KnitOM.com lists dropping a stitch as the most common knitting mistake that beginners make. You can use your fingers to slide the loop back onto your full needle with a little finagling. Once you have it back on, you can resume progress. Now that you know how to perform a knit stitch, here's me continuing to work on this piece as a time lapse. Every time I empty a needle, I switch which hands the needles are in and continue to repeat the same steps over and over. The full needle should always be in your left hand and the empty one in your right. You can see that my piece gradually gets longer and longer as the number of rows you knit will determine the length of your piece, whereas how many stitches you cast on determines the width. Once you're happy with the length of your piece, it's time for step 3, casting off. This is how you'll finish off your piece without it unraveling. Move 2 stitches over from your full needle to your empty needle, as you would if you were continuing to knit. Using your fingers, move the first stitch you transferred over the second stitch, letting the first stitch fall off the needle. With only 1 stitch now in your empty needle, transfer over another knit stitch, and repeat that process until you run out of stitches. Once you get good at using your fingers, you can use the right needle to guide the second stitch out from underneath the first stitch in addition to your hands, as I do here. After you only have 1 stitch left on the needle, cut your piece off the working end of the yarn. Feed the fresh end through the loop still on the needle and slide the loop off. Pull the new end tight, creating a knot at the edge of your piece, completing your cast off. Trim the long ends of your piece away now that you're finished. Congratulations, you now know how to cast off. Now that you can cast on, knit stitch, and cast off, you officially know how to knit. Congrats! Next time you have a free Saturday night, spend your time de-stressing by knitting whatever your heart desires.